Hello and welcome to today's video, which is a little bit different. It's a bit of a collab with Spittingink. This is a teacher with real passion for what he's doing, and I'd love him to get more subscribers. He makes two kinds of videos really. So if we look at this playlist all about the set poetry, he puts the poems to a rap beat and makes them incredibly memorable. His raps are really good. He's got a lovely style, much better than anything else that you've probably heard in English rapping. And for many of you, that will really help you just remember the poem. The quotes will just pop out at you. You'll easily tap into them in the exam. And that's a fantastic way to revise. You can see the videos are super short, really easy to remember the poems that way. And then he has some other sorts of videos where he uses the key quotations. This is my favourite, the one on an Inspector Calls. He uses those key quotations and puts them together in a kind of rap essay. Again, this is only 4 minutes long, and you'll remember a tremendous amount just from listening to it a few times. So let's check out the Inspector Calls one. Good beat, isn't it? Got you bopping? Head moving side to side? Anyway, you get the idea. It's really cool. So in a minute, I'm going to take you through some of the text of his rap of a Macbeth video so that you can see whether learning the quotations this way will really help you or not. So let's check out some of the video that will be the lyrics to.
I step in and my wife got a plan. Used to be at the king's right hand. She questioned whether I was a man. Now Neptune got what's the blood from my hand. Said a little water will clear us, but I'm not really sure it can. Now my iambics won't scan, and I can't even see our men, oh man.
So you get the flavour. Now, I'm not just interested in Spittingink for the entertainment value, though you might be. I also want to explore how useful it is to have quotations remembered in this way in a song. So let's go to the first stanza of his song, or we'd call it a verse, wouldn't we? So he focuses on the king's soul. Now that's really useful to you because you're going to talk about the religious context of the play, the divine right of kings, the great chain of being. All these things tie into the idea, this Christian belief, that we have a soul, that the king is appointed by God, and that to commit regicide and kill the king is to directly attack God, which leads to Macbeth's tragedy. The other theme that he's tapped into here is the theme of fate. So these are Lady Macbeth's words, what's done cannot be undone, but there's also a sense that Macbeth cannot escape a fate. The witches tell him his future, and whatever he does to make that future different, for example, trying to kill Banquo and Fleance, does not work because the fate is already written. It is already done even before Macbeth performs any of these acts. And that makes it in the tradition of Greek tragedy. So again, you've got some context there that you'll be able to use to get higher grades. We have quite a few quotations in this verse which will also help you access those grades. So we've got this line of Lady Macbeth questioning whether he was a man. And this focus on what a man should be is right at the heart of the play. It allows Lady Macbeth to manipulate her husband, if you take that interpretation, or it allows Macbeth to become the man he wants to be by getting his wife to be the spur that pricks the sides of his intent. But it's a play about what it means to be a man, what it is to be masculine. He exists in contrast to Macduff, for example, and Macduff has a completely different form of manhood. Macbeth does everything to please his wife. Macduff does the opposite, and in fact he sacrifices her to Macbeth's anger, when he leaves his wife and his children in his castle. He knows that they're going to get assassinated, but he does it anyway. So this question about what makes an honourable man is a really interesting one in the play. Then we've got the focus on Neptune. Now, I love this because it's a classical reference. It goes back to pre-Christian times, and one way of looking at it shows us that Macbeth does not believe in God. That's why he's quite happy to kill the king. He doesn't believe in the divine right of kings or in the great chain of being. But then he's punished because Shakespeare wants to show that he's wrong. And so Macbeth is presented as a kind of pagan figure who's not Christian. On the other hand, you can decide that Shakespeare is also presenting an unchristian message deep inside the play. So Macbeth isn't going to go to hell, he's just going to get punished here on earth. We've got this recurring image of washing blood from his hands. First, he needs to wash the blood from his hands after he's killed Duncan, and this is when he believes that even great Neptune's ocean won't clean the blood from his hands. That symbolises the enormity of his feelings of guilt. And then this image, a motif if you like, is picked up by Lady Macbeth at her end when she sleepwalks and can't remove the blood from her own hand. Blood which is not there, again symbolises her extreme feeling of guilt. Of course, with Lady Macbeth, she focuses on the idea of hell, and she is definitely a Christian, which perhaps makes her stand apart from her husband. Then we have her water, her words rather, a little water clears us of this deed, but of course it doesn't. So there's this irony that the blood is not literal, it's metaphorical, and it will stay with her forever, and she can never wash it off. Obviously, we've got the key word here, iambic. I'm making some videos at the minute where we look at when Shakespeare stops using the iambic pentameter, and it's really useful to be able to spot that because it shows when characters are lying or out of control. But to understand that, you also need to know what the iambic pentameter is, and this might help you remember it. Then we have the quotation where Macbeth is really worried that he couldn't say Amen when he was killing the king. So you could use that to show that Macbeth does have a Christian belief, although I would argue the opposite. He doesn't have a Christian belief, and therefore he's really surprised when he can't say Amen, because as a Christian, you wouldn't expect to be asking for forgiveness from God while you were murdering somebody. You know, that just would not work. However, being able to sort of rhetorically say Amen while you were killing Duncan would be the kind of joke that Macbeth enjoys. I mean, if you look at that description of when he unseamed his enemy from the nave to the chops, I don't know if you remember that bit, the bit that goes with that is he shook the man's hand and said goodbye to him while he sliced him open, and he could watch his entrails fall out. You know, truly disgusting. But that's the kind of throwaway humour, this black humour, that Macbeth has. We've got a whole heap of quotations here that you can use to argue all sorts of interesting points of view. So the bell invites him to kill Duncan, but he does this interesting psychological trick where he's not saying his wife is inviting him or that he himself is inviting himself to kill the king. He's depersonalizing it as though it's not really him that's doing this. And this symbolizes perhaps that he can't face the regicide that he's about to perform, but he's going to do it anyway. It points to how this will eventually drive him mad. That links exactly, doesn't it, to his worry that he's murdered sleep, this voice that he's heard that Lady Macbeth hasn't. This could be his conscience, or it could even be God speaking to him and saying that he will never sleep soundly again because of what he's done. We've got the repetition of a little water clears us of this deed. We've got the fear that he has of the natural world. The owl shrieks, perfectly common, but now he feels nature is turning against him. Why? Well, Shakespeare's point is that he's gone against nature. He's gone against the great chain of being by killing Duncan. Therefore, he now feels that nature is going against him. Here we've got this phrase, played most foully. These were Banquo's words where he thinks that Macbeth has actually killed Duncan himself. Now, what's fascinating about that is that Banquo doesn't tell anyone that he suspects Macbeth. Well, why not? Well, possibly because he needs Macbeth to become king for the rest of the prophecy to come true, that Banquo's sons will become kings. And this links us to the next quotation, the Fruitless Crown, where Macbeth is reflecting on the fact that he has no fruit, in other words, no children. So his crown will not get passed on to his own son. It's going to go to Banquo. There's a further meaning here that he will take no pleasure in being king. The crown itself is fruitless because he will not enjoy a single moment of being king, because he's murdered Sleep, he's murdered Duncan, and his punishment is that he will not enjoy the fruits of his crime. Then we have this fantastic quotation from Lady Macbeth. I love using this one because it's like a child's rhyme. And often you'll see it performed in a kind of sing-song rhyme. It shows Lady Macbeth going back to a childlike state. But the psychology of Lady Macbeth and children is actually much more interesting. Remember, Macbeth and his wife have lost a child very, very recently. She's been lactating, hasn't she? She's just asked for her milk to be taken away. So the death of her child has happened really, really recently. And now she's thinking about the death of Macduff's children. At this moment, she's starting to question whether her husband is sane. She can't cope with his bloodlust, and this would explain the reason for her suicide. She does not recognise this man as the man that she married. And the irony, of course, is that she's made him this way. She's given him the spur to start committing murder. But once he's done that, he just can't stop. So I use this quotation to show that Macbeth is a monster that she has created. And that, I think, is why the quotation ends with wife, because she's thinking, obviously, about Macduff's wife who's been killed, who was also innocent, but she's also thinking about the role of the wife and the role that she has taken in driving Macbeth towards murder. This is why the next quotation is really useful when the doctor says, "More needs she the divine than the physician," because Shakespeare is presenting her psychological torment as a divine punishment. God has given her this tremendous guilt because he's going to ruin her waking hours, ruin her sleeping hours. In other words, she's not going to enjoy being queen at all, and then when she dies, she has the further punishment of hell. Then we come down here to this beautiful bit of alliteration where Macbeth is worried that Fleance has escaped, and he calls himself cabined, cribbed, confined. And this pattern of three, this triplet of the alliteration, really emphasises how trapped he feels by fate. And this again is linked to the idea of fate trapping him, confining him. He just can't escape what's already been decided by the fates. And then this final quotation is a super useful one, where he sees himself as leading a charmed life, as though this charm is a positive thing. But actually it turns out that this is a charm like a spell that the witches would perform. It's an evil one. So he believes that he's charmed and cannot be killed, but the very person he tells this to, Macduff, is the very one who tells him to despair thy charm. It is in fact a false charm, an evil one, because obviously Macduff has been ripped from his mother's womb and can therefore kill Macbeth, which is linked again to his fate. And so the interesting thing here is that his fate is not necessarily brought about by killing Duncan in the first place. This fate is an inevitable consequence of just being alive. It seems that Macbeth would have ended up being killed in this way, regardless of whether he'd chosen to kill Duncan or not. And that's a really interesting way of looking at tragedy. That's the way that the Greeks looked at tragedy. So in Greek tragedy, and they invented it after all as a theatrical form, the hero tries all sorts of ways to escape their fate, but everything they do makes that fate come about. without any knowledge that that's what they're doing. They're actually trying not to meet their fate. And once the king is dead, a lot of that happens to Macbeth. So if you're still here, hopefully I persuaded you to give Spittingink a go. Let's see his advice on the unseen poem. So I hope you like his passion. Give his videos a go and let me know what you think. Thank you, Spittingink. See what I did there?